Kia ora everyone. So I'm speaking on valuing the invaluable and why native forests are worth fighting for. The topics I'll be presenting are briefly deforestation, what we've lost, the crisis we are now facing, and I'll speak about the research that we've done on non-timber values, and this is a subset of ecosystem services. I'll also talk about what we can gain and pose the question, where and how can we weave native forests back into our landscapes? Thanks, Izzy. We've lost a lot, and previous speakers have spoken about this, and Dame Anne has spoken about it as well. So we've lost about 80% of our native forest. New Zealand was once heavily forested, and with that loss, we lost all those ecosystem services that are so important to us. These forests stabilised our soils, maintained clean waterways, recycled nutrients, harboured huge biodiversity, provided food, resources, medicine, stored massive amounts of carbon above and below ground, and helped form our unique landscapes. Today, nearly 36% of our land area is in forest cover, with about 29% in native forest and native shrubland, but most of this is upland. Outside of South Westland and Fiordland, we have very little lowland forest remaining in much of Aotearoa. And with this loss, we've faced terrible losses. We have one of the worst extinction rates in the world. And this is across all our flora and fauna, but our greatest biological loss is 42% of our terrestrial bird species since human settlement. This is some 55 species lost. The crisis we are now facing, and they're all interconnected, as Dame Anne said, erosion and sedimentation. We have some of the worst erosion in the world. We have ongoing biodiversity loss. As Penny Nelson said earlier today, we have the most endangered species, native species, and so many of these species are endemic only in New Zealand. We also have sharply declining water quality and, of course, climate change. So I pose the question, where and how can we best weave native forests back into our landscape and restore those ecosystem services, and where can we get bang for bucks? Fortunately, now natural capital, and that's the whole stock of our natural resources, are being recognised as absolutely fundamental to our economy, to our well-being, the health of our ecosystems. They are profound and a non-substitutional basis for the economy, according to the Tax Working Group report in 2019. And this includes land that some will regard as unused or vacant. It is still providing a stream of ecosystem services that underpin human existence. Rod Carr spoke this morning about New Zealand's climate change commitments, and in its advice to government, the Climate Change Commission recommended establishment of 300,000 hectares of new native forests before 2035. And the current data shows that we're falling far short of this. But the Commission also recognises the wider value of native forests beyond just carbon sequestration. But good policy, governance, investment in research and development and incentive schemes are needed to support scaling up of capacity and expertise and landowner buy-in. So almost a year ago, we published, the Tainese Tree Trust published a bulletin on our research on non-timber values, and we'd like to thank the Tyndall Foundation who helped fund this research. And it was out of a need to properly value our native forests based on the myriad of ecosystem services they provide. The focus was on New Zealand's native forests outside of the conservation estates, so we're talking about private land. Literature was examined and knowledge gaps and deficiencies identified and recommendations made. So upstairs you can get a copy of this book, and it's also available online, free. We looked at non-timber forest products or secondary forest products. I'm not going to go through all of these, we don't have time, but I do want to say that New Zealand is the second biggest honey producer in the world, and that whole industry needs native species because it is the native forest that provides the early season nectar flow that is absolutely critical to our apiary industry. We also have rongoa on pharmaceuticals and natural remedies. So more and more data is showing the clinical efficacy of our rongoa species. And this has become even more important since the pandemic, because people are more and more interested in natural remedies, and many small industries have been developed and I'm seeing more and more being developed throughout the country, and quite a few Māori organisations. There's also environmental regulating services. I won't talk too much about carbon sequestration because several of my colleagues will be speaking about that soon. There's also habitat provision and biodiversity values and a whole host of other environmental regulating services. Water quality. I want to thank Mike Joy for some of these photos. The data isn't good. Most of our low-lying lakes and rivers surveyed have poor or very poor water quality. This is costing us. This is costing the country. It's costing us in terms of what the government is having to do to improve water quality. It's costing us in terms of health and well-being of New Zealanders. The high nitrate levels in many of our waterways are associated with multiple health factors, including blue baby syndrome, and more recently a strong link has been observed, documented between bowel cancer and high nitrates. And an estimate of 100 cases of bowel cancer in New Zealand are now being linked with these high nitrate levels, and an estimate of 40 deaths. Land use and water quality, there's a very strong database now across the country showing that water quality and aquatic ecosystem health deteriorate from the pristine natural vegetation through to exotic plantation forest, and then dips down in pastoral land and urban areas. What is the value of clean water? Who pays? Who benefits? How much are we prepared to pay for clean water? You've got here on this slide, you might recognise Ian Brennan. He's one of our trustees, and he has a hill country dry stock farm, Te Miro, one of the highest points in the Waikato, and he has planted up his erodible land and his catchments, and he's at the top of about 5 different catchments, the Waikato and Waiho. So much of what he does, the benefits accrue downstream. Erosion, it's a major problem in New Zealand. As I said before, we have some of the worst erosion in the world. What is the value of stable land? Who pays? Who benefits? And you'll see the little yellow arrow there. There is trustee Ian Brennan again, and he's flown a drone over a slip from a recent weather bomb and it's one area where he hadn't got to planting yet. But you see in the picture below, this is his land again, and here he's planting up this steep land on his property. Again, I pose the question, who pays, who benefits? Because many of the benefits accrue downstream. Carbon sequestration, I'll not speak much on this at all because it will be addressed later this afternoon, but it's the only environmental non-timber value that can be readily monetarised. I've got in this image two of my colleagues, and they both said almost exactly the same thing when they saw these images. They said, wow, a 53-year-old woman and a 68-year-old man, we don't really compare with a much younger kahikatea tree and a much younger kauri tree. Of course, I've got to put a caveat in here. These are planted on ex-farm sites with high fertility, and these have been very well managed. Lastly, socio-economic, cultural and spiritual services. These are huge, but much of them are difficult to value. It's valuing the invaluable. We're talking about cultural and spiritual values, kaitiakatanga and conservation. And of course, we've got a very fast-growing ecotourism industry. It's also about social licence to practice, and it's about our international reputation. Our clean, green, 100% pure New Zealand branding. These are so important to our economy. Tautura. Tautura is a species that is incredibly important to Māori. It is naturally durable and excellent for carving. Can we have our cake and eat it too? Can timber be extracted from native forests without compromising other ecosystem services? Two of my colleagues will be speaking about continuous cover forestry systems and this very question. Talking about forest management, another thing I would like to address that has been spoken about by several speakers before me, zombie forests, compromised values. The impact of browsers and predators undermines all the values associated with native forest. Finally, sustainably managed native forests deserve a much higher profile as an economically viable land use. Access to nature is vital to our well-being. Riparian zones have the highest non-timber values, and aggregated non-timber values for native forests are greater than for exotic plantation. Biodiversity is pivotal. If you pull up biodiversity, you pull up all the other values. So the final question is native afforestation. Who pays, who benefits? The benefits accrue to the wider community, locally, downstream, regionally, nationally and internationally. Many of these benefits are difficult to monetize. However, New Zealand has an opportunity to incentivise native afforestation and reward landowners for provision of ecosystem services for the benefit of all. The models to do this urgently need to be developed. Thank you.